every Lebanese person I've spoken to has said this is going to come down to the land, and it's the land that they want, their land that they want back.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vossoughian. Today on the show, the stakes are high for people in southern Lebanon, heading into tomorrow's scheduled peace talks between Lebanon and Israel in Washington, D.C. It's only the second time representatives from those countries have met in decades. And Hezbollah, the Iran proxy fighting Israel in the region, won't be at the table. But the outcome could still be crucial, including for the ongoing negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. And so we're breaking format a bit today to first understand how this war has already impacted the folks directly caught in the crossfire, the challenges they're facing, and what each side is hoping to get out of these talks. So first, we're going to southern Lebanon, where Israel and Hezbollah have continued to trade strikes on Wednesday despite that ceasefire. We've been talking to NBC News correspondent and your regular Here's the Scoop host, Yasmin Vossoughian, all week. She spent the day in southern Lebanon. Hey, Yas, how are you?
Hi, I'm really tired.
I can imagine.
This.
I know you've done a lot of work today. Let's set up the stakes here. Since the war began, Israel has been carrying out an intense bombardment and ground invasion of southern Lebanon, displacing more than 1 million people. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he wants to establish this security zone, right, that Israel would retain control of after the war ends. He claims it's for the safety of the Israeli people from attacks from Hezbollah inside Lebanon. As you told us yesterday, the Lebanese people that you're talking to in Beirut are adamantly against this idea. Today, you were in southern Lebanon to see right there on the cusp of that zone. First, let's talk about travel inside of Lebanon right now. It's not easy. What was the journey like from Beirut?
So you're right, it's not easy. And we are the first NBC News crew to make it to southern Lebanon since this war began. We left early this morning around 8 a.m. And as you make your way further and further away from Beirut, further and further south, you can kind of start to see the conservative nature of the country begin to creep more and more into the advertisements that you're seeing on the side of the roads. The big crossing that begins to introduce you to southern Lebanon, really the artery that connects both the north and the south to Lebanon, is the Qasemiya Bridge. Now, this has kind of become an infamous bridge because this bridge was bombed by Israel during this war. One of the reasons why it was bombed is because it's the artery connecting the north to the south, because a lot of supplies and resupplies for Hezbollah, artillery, that kind of thing, are gotten to Hezbollah, are transported to Hezbollah over the Qasemiya Bridge. Since then, they've been able to rebuild half of the bridge. So we were able to transport over the bridge. The devastation to this area, to the bridge, was incredible to see. Once you cross over the bridge is when you're about 20 kilometers or so north of Tyre, which is the city we were heading to. And as you got closer and closer to Tyre, which again is a Hezbollah stronghold, you would begin to see these yellow flags interspersed with Lebanese flags. The yellow flag represents Hezbollah. And as you get further and further south, you see more and more of these Hezbollah flags. And then as you begin to enter kind of the gates, that is when you begin to see the images and the pictures of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the former supreme leader of Iran, who was killed in the very first few days of the war with Iran, and Mujtaba Khamenei standing behind him, the current supreme leader of Iran. And if you don't know, the reason why we're seeing these images is because Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, and therefore they worship the supreme leader of Iran, which speaks to the conversation that we've been having all week in part, which is how much influence does Iran have over Hezbollah? Well, if you're looking at those images, you would actually assume a lot. I'll say one more thing. Not everybody in Tyre, for instance, is a believer in the ideology of Hezbollah, a follower of Hezbollah. It just happens to be a Hezbollah stronghold. There are a lot of civilians there. There are a lot of people that just want to live in peace.
I understand you spoke with a man there whose entire family essentially was hit by an Israeli airstrike, right? Tell me what did he say to you?
This was a really emotional conversation about 3 minutes before the ceasefire went into effect between Israel and Lebanon, Fadel was sitting in his apartment on his bed alongside his grandson, his 8-year-old grandson. In the room next to him was his wife, his daughter, her 2 other children. And as he sat on this bed, he was stroking his grandson's head, trying to get him to go to sleep. And he said to me, it felt as if an earthquake started to shake the ground. And he told me it was so severe that the ceiling started to fall on top of him. And at that point, he told me that his grandson started to slip away from him, was kind of sliding away as if the ground was on like a slope. And he grabbed onto his grandson and held on to him for dear life. And at that point, the entire building collapsed on top of them. And when the shaking stopped and the rumbling stopped and the collapsing stopped, everything was still. He started to hear ambulance and sirens coming towards the area in which he was trapped. And he talks about how they dug him out, and one by one, little by little, they would ask him to move forward. He couldn't move forward. He said his entire body was aching. He could not move anything. And finally, they were able to open up enough of an area in which they could slide his 8-year-old grandson through. And for 4 more hours after that, he thought to himself, I can die now because my grandson has lived. And after 4 hours, he was pulled from the rubble. That's when he finds out that 5 family members that he was with moments ago had perished and were gone forever. And he tells me about how his grandson is in so much pain right now, having lost almost his entire family.
My 8-year-old grandson needs therapy. You look at him and he's completely not there. Sometimes he cries, sometimes he smiles. He doesn't know how to act. He has lost control. He lost everyone, his mother, his brother, his sister. They are all alone now.
And being with Fadel and hearing his story, he's now literally sleeping on a cot on top of his brother's coffee shop. He says, I have nothing now. I just praise God as he tells me, my family is gone and we were just innocent civilians. And we don't know why they targeted us. This is what he told me.
He's still there. This bombing has been going on for weeks, Yaz. I'm wondering, some people have left, some have fled and gone north, some have stayed. What's the calculus families are making?
These are their memories. Where are they going to go? I mean, there's tent cities set up here in Beirut. And they are living essentially they're living inside 4 walls, many of them. I met this other woman today, the mother of 2 young girls. She survived the strike on her home. And she says she tells her daughter every day, this is your home, this is your land. You cannot leave, even if you're scared. This is where we belong.
Whenever they hear a plane, they say, Mom, the plane is coming to destroy our toys. I try to comfort them. I would tell them, if we leave, we're handing our home over to Israelis.
Yasmin, who's helping people now? Is it the Lebanese government? Aid groups? Is it friends? Is it family? Is it Hezbollah?
It's all of the above. Hezbollah is as a terrorist organization outside of Lebanon, but has seats in parliament here in the Lebanese government, and also has a military arm, which is the arm of the group that carries out the attacks that they do. But Hezbollah does help in these situations, the people in these areas, as does the Lebanese government, as do friends, as do family members. And, groups like Hezbollah, that is how they gain also the support that they do in a lot of these communities, because oftentimes in these kind of smaller communities where they have more of a leadership presence, they're able to provide, as we saw in Gaza as well, they're able to provide some of the resources that maybe governmental organizations aren't necessarily able to do all the time. That's not to discount. I'm not trying to discount anything that Hezbollah carries out or any of these organizations, these horrendous acts that these organizations carry out. I'm just trying to explain how it is that they ingratiate themselves in these communities.
And these talks happening tomorrow, Hezbollah not at the table, but it is remarkable to have Israel and Lebanon talking to each other directly. I mean, that is rare and remarkable. One of the big points of contention here, one of the big points of negotiation, rather, is that Israel controls this buffer zone south of Tyre, where you've just been. Essentially, this is a no man's land right now, right?
They have asked everybody south of the buffer zone or in the buffer zone to evacuate that area. People that kind of enter the buffer zone are certainly under risk of confronting or being confronted by the Israeli Defense Forces. There's been rocket fire inside the buffer zone even today. There have been incidents with journalists today, Lebanese journalists who were caught inside the buffer zone, surrounded by the IDF. So there is continued fighting inside the buffer zone, and it is going to be one of the biggest points of contention, especially going into these talks tomorrow, because every Lebanese person I've spoken to has said this is going to come down to the land, and it's the land that they want, their land that they want back.
The fragile ceasefire in the Iran war has been extended, and the talks scheduled in Islamabad have been put on hold. While President Trump has said that the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz will continue during the indefinite ceasefire, Iran retaliated this morning, attacking 3 ships. They say the Revolutionary Guard seized 2. Meanwhile, as we've talked about, officials from Lebanon and Israel are set to meet at the State Department in D.C. tomorrow. It's the first round of talks between the two sides since a ceasefire went into effect last Friday. And as we've discussed, these talks will be complicated by the fact that Hezbollah conducts its military operations independently from the Lebanese government, but won't be in the room for negotiations. So what are the biggest sticking points, and how likely are we to see anything concrete come out of tomorrow's meeting? Yasmin Vossoughian is still with us from Lebanon, and we're joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who's in Tel Aviv. Hi, Matt.
Hey, how are you?
Great. Look, you've been talking, Matt, I know, to diplomats in the Middle East and the U.S. ahead of these talks. What are the main sticking points here for Israel right now?
I mean, we're talking about really 2 big questions. It's not just the one question. We're talking about both sort of normalization of relations between Israel and Lebanon, which have never had, for example, shared ambassadors or anything like that. And then we're talking about the sort of the more immediate question of this ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. So a lot of these questions now, there are the bigger questions, the more long-term questions, and the smaller questions. The smaller questions right now have a lot to do with whether or not Israel is going to withdraw, whether or not Hezbollah is going to finally give up its weapons, and where the Lebanese government sits in all this, whether the Lebanese government is going to be able to step in and push Hezbollah to surrender all of their weapons. That's a really big question going forward for all sides.
You know, Yaz, Israeli leaders have pretty much stood firm so far on maintaining this buffer zone in southern Lebanon. How are Lebanese officials reacting to the prospect of a potentially indefinite Israeli presence in that part of the country? What else are they demanding from Israel?
They're reacting negatively to it. It's a no-go for the Lebanese government for 2 reasons. 1, because they believe it is rightfully their land. 2, believes it would be incredibly unpopular with the electorate here in Lebanon to allow Israel to stay within that buffer zone. Along with wanting them to withdraw from the buffer zone, they say the aim here is for them to fully stop Israeli attacks on the land tier, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon, absolutely, the release of Lebanese prisoners in Israel as well. Whether or not they have the ability to actually control Hezbollah, I do think is the bigger question as we're talking about the asks of Israel in this negotiating process.
What about that question of normalization that Matt brought up? I mean, the fact that they're talking officially person to person is remarkable. Is What about the idea of normalizing relations between these two?
I think the government actually is more on board with quote unquote normalization than the people actually are in this country. I also think, though, that people have different definitions of what normalization means. If normalization means we're not at war every single day of our lives for the past how many decades, the majority of the Lebanese government is very much on board with normalization with their relationship with Israel. Now, does that mean travel between Lebanon and Israel? Does that mean trade? I think that is a bigger question. But peace and living side by side, the Lebanese government supports that and is trying to, it seems, get that across the finish line. And you can see that by the step that they're taking that is unprecedented in its nature.
Hey, Matt, after the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon was announced, you spoke with a senior Hezbollah official who called the talks between Lebanese and Israeli officials largely symbolic. What have you heard from Hezbollah leaders this week? Are they still dismissive of tomorrow's talks?
When it comes to normalization, Hezbollah is very, very much opposed. And when it comes to giving up their arms, of course, they're very, very much opposed. So this is something that we heard recently. When it comes to the ceasefire, they were very, very happy. And they really said that they were totally on board. I talked to multiple leaders. They said they were on board as long as Israel stood by its side of the treaty. And that to them means eventually withdrawing. And for now, at least, not firing on Hezbollah. But the thing is, things have changed so dramatically for Hezbollah in just the past couple of weeks. We're now seeing the Lebanese government itself, and Yasmin was mentioning this, as an emerging force to constrain Hezbollah. It used to be that Hezbollah was the one that constrained the Lebanese government. And now we've had a total shift, both in terms of the way the government is standing, and as Yasmin said, maybe the people aren't really there quite yet. But it looks as though there is a big momentum that we haven't seen before in Lebanon toward finally disarming Hezbollah.
I think that's actually because of a popular shift. I mean, I think it's representative in what I've been hearing from people all around the country that are honestly just exhausted by war. And I think the Lebanese government is actually catching on to that. I mean, don't forget, they've had a lot of major economic pitfalls in this country. And so they recognize they could either isolate themselves and be controlled by Hezbollah. This is the Lebanese government talking, of course, or they could try and control Hezbollah.
Hezbollah sits in parliament in Lebanon, but has less representation than just a few years ago. But Matt, I mean, I'm wondering, Hezbollah's not at the table here on these historic talks between Israel and Lebanon. Does Israel really believe that Lebanon can even disarm Hezbollah? I mean, they want Hezbollah disarmed. That's almost like a precursor for next steps.
This is the big thing. And even Hezbollah has basically more or less signed on to an agreement that said that they would disarm below a certain river in southern Lebanon. That is something that when I've asked Israeli officials about that, they've said, yeah, we think that the Lebanese government has made an actual genuine effort to try to disarm Hezbollah. They haven't seen it in any way that they would consider satisfactory, but they would attribute that to the weakness of the government, not their unwillingness. As far as I can tell from my conversations with Israeli officials in politics and in the military and security establishment, they really believe that this is a moment when the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government are resolutely turning against Hezbollah, and that this is the time when they can use them to disarm Hezbollah. And then now that they're seeing, for example, people like the Speaker of Lebanon's parliament, Nabih Berri, has come out in support of disarming Hezbollah. And this is a man from the Amal party, a Shiite political party that is a partner of Hezbollah, and they are also turning against them. So as far as the Israelis are concerned, this is a real opportunity.
I'm curious to hear from both of you on this next point here. The White House has postponed talks that were going to be in Islamabad with Iran, right? Those are scheduled to take place today. How could the outcome of tomorrow's talks between Lebanon and Israel, I guess, maybe guide or affect the next stages of negotiations between the U.S. and Iran? Matt, you go first.
Well, I mean, they've already played a critical role in terms of making them possible, because Pakistan and Iran hung the Lebanon talks and the Lebanon file on top of the broader Iran-U.S. So it's already kind of played that critical role. And I think the role that it has left to play, to answer your question directly, is as the opposite. It made these talks so the Lebanon file could break them too. As for any individual changes it could make on the actual negotiations between the U.S. and Iran, I think those would be minor. But if the situation breaks, if the ceasefire breaks over the border between Israel and Lebanon, then we could see the whole ceasefire across the entire region break as well.
I think Matt is right. Because I think if there's incremental changes to the ceasefire deal in this meeting tomorrow, i.e. an extension of this ceasefire, I am not optimistic that there could be feasibly a negotiated permanent end to the war, especially considering the parties that are at the table here. I think there would have to be higher level negotiations in order to negotiate a permanent end to the war, because as many people well know, these are the ambassadors of both Israel and Lebanon to the United States that are meeting in Washington, along with the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. If there's an extension of this ceasefire, I don't think there's really going to be any effects on the ongoing talks or potential talks between Iran and the United States. As Matt said, I think if there's a break, that could mean also a break when it comes to Iran and the United States, because Iran sees Hezbollah as a proxy. If Hezbollah is fighting Israel, then Iran could feasibly then launch on, again, the United States and or vice versa.
Guys, great conversation. Matt, thanks so much. And Yaz, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Christine Romans, filling in for Yasmin Vossoughian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. If you like what you heard, subscribe.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.